All right. The last time we ended at the beginning of the last scene of Act 3. And that last scene is a very short scene, and it is meant to provide the future setting for the whole play. It takes place on the wild coasts of Bohemia. There is a storm, and Antigonus, who is supposed to leave Perdita out to be exposed to nature, his ship is anchored along the shore. It's being tossed around by the wind and the waves. And as the scene opens, Antigonus and a mariner are walking along the shore and talking. And Antigonus speaks of the impending storm, which is worsening, and he sends the mariner back to safety on the ship. And at this point, people still coming. Hi, Millie. When Antigonus is alone, walking along the coast, he talks to himself and he discusses what happened in his dream the night before. In that dream, he says, he's carrying the baby that he's going to expose, and he says, "Come, poor babe, I have heard but not believed, the spirits of the dead may walk again. If such thing be, thy mother appeared to me last night, for ne'er was dream so like wakening. To me comes a creature, sometimes her head on one side, some another. I never saw a vessel of like sorrow, so filled and so becoming. In pure white robes, like very sanctity, she did approach my cabin where I lay, thrice bowed before me, and gasping to begin some speech, her eyes became two spouts. The fury spent, anon, did this break from her. Good Antigonus, since fate against thy better disposition hath made thy person for the thrower out of my poor babe, according to thine oath, places remote enough are in Bohemia. There weep and leave it crying, for the babe is counted lost forever. Perdita, I prithee call it. For this ungentle business, put on thee, my lord, thou ne'er shalt. For this ungentle business, put on thee, my lord, thou shalt ne'er see thy wife Paulina again. And so with shrieks she melted into the air, affrighted much. I did in time collect myself and thought this was so, and no slumber. Dreams are toys. Yet for this once, yea, superstitiously, I'll be squared by this. I do believe Hermione hath suffered death, and that Apollo would, this being indeed the issue of King Polixenes, it should be here laid, either for life or death, upon the earth. Of its right, Father, blossom, speed thee well." All right. This is pretty exact description. It's very interesting. We want to note one little fact about it, that he calls the child Blossom, because that comes into the whole scene. As Antigonus leaves the baby and its effects, he's chased off by a bear. At this point, a shepherd comes in complaining to himself about the tribulations of raising youth, and he discovers the babe. He enters commenting on youth. He says, I would there were no age between 10 and 23 and 20, or that youth would sleep out the rest, for there is nothing in the in-between but getting wenches with child, wronging the ancientry, stealing, fighting. Hark you now, Would any but these boiled brains of 19 and 22 hunt this weather? They have scared away 2 of my best sheep, which I fear the wolf will sooner find than the master. If anywhere I have them, 'tis by the seaside browsing of ivory. Good luck, and it be thy will. What have we here? Mercy on's, a barn, a very pretty barn. A boy or a girl? He's discovered the child at this point. I wonder. A pretty one, a very pretty one. Sure, some scape. Though I'm not bookish, yet I can read waiting gentlewoman in the scape. This has been some staircase work, some trunk work, some behind door work. They were warmer that got this than the poor thing is here. I'll take it up for pity, yet I'll tarry till my son come. He hallowed, but even now. Wahoa, hoa. His simpleton son comes in, and he describes, Shakespeare calls the simpleton son a clown, and he describes what he has just seen. He describes seeing a man being chased and caught and eaten by a bear, and he describes a ship sinking in a terrible, terrible storm. We'll read that, and we'll leave off from reading for a bit. I would you did but see how it chafes, how it rages, how it takes up the shore. But that's not to the point. Oh, the most piteous cry of the poor souls, sometimes to see 'em and not to see 'em. Now the ship boring the moon with her mainmast, and anon swallowing with yeast and frost as you thrust a cork into a hogshead. And then for the land service, to see how the bear tore out his shoulder bone, how he cried to me for help, and his name was Antigonus, a nobleman. But to make an end of the ship, to see how the sea flap-dragoned it. But first how the poor souls roared, and the sea mocked them, and how the poor gentleman roared, and the bear mocked him, both roaring louder than sea or weather. It is a most interesting little scene. That's about the whole of the scene, because the shepherd then shows his son, the babe, and all of the things that were left for the babe, including a good amount of gold, and they all rejoice over the fairy gold. When we began these talks, I said I would try to be very clear about what in the presentation was indeed Shakespeare and what was my own thought, and I try to make clear what was in that uncertain no man's land in between. This simple scene is one of those latter cases. It is of great certainty to me, whether Shakespeare intended this in full consciousness or not. I think so, but I'm not certain. But I've been baffled by this scene for 16 years. And more than that, actually 20. First, let's dispatch the dream of Antigonus. It really is not a dream, and Shakespeare is very clear about that. It is an awakening out of the body in sleep. Shakespeare is clear in pointing out that there's no symbolism in the dream, but that it is as close to waking reality as waking reality is itself. Normally, if there's anything unusual or incongruous in a dream, that means that it's really a dream and not a spiritual seeing. What takes place in the dream, beside the clear description of it, is also correct in terms of mysticism. Hermione, as a human, and not a symbol, is not superhuman. She is, as we have seen, she's bright, she's articulate, and she's very high-minded, moral, and ethical, but she is not superhuman. Not being an advanced soul, it requires very strong motivation to accomplish the type of psychic phenomena that she accomplished. If you leave your body behind, either in death or in sleep, and you're functioning from the inner worlds, it is very hard to come back to this plane and make yourself manifest. In her case, she has strong motivation, her babe. This squares exactly with what mystical seers find. They find that ordinary people can't do that unless there is some urgent need. And the most common urgent need that brings one back from the dead, or that brings one out of their body to do something for the living, is a child. There are a lot of cases of this, not only of this kind of psychic phenomena. I have a friend that works in pediatric intensive care, and she describes a case where the doctors were working on a child and they were trying to get the mother to tell in detail everything that happened. And the one doctor who had been doing this for his entire life, he said, it's really important that you get every detail just right, because if there are internal injuries, you can mess them up if you don't take the right action. He said, I remember one time we were quizzing this mother about what had happened. The car had been run over by the car, the child had been run over by the car, and the doctor said, she said, well, I did this, and then I did this, and then I picked up the car. And there are several recorded instances like that people, faint, small women, can pick up a car because of the urgency of the situation. They can bring together power that they would not normally have. We have such powers in ourselves, and it's only our egoism that keeps us from being able to manifest them, or we should be able to do the same things that the birds do, fly, or to do all sorts of physical feats like animals do. And egoism is the thing that keeps us from it. But when we sacrifice all egoism for the sake of an infant, for example, we can do things that we never believed possible. So that is all very true. Shakespeare is also not embellishing the story when he says that, when he puts in the mouth of Hermione in the dream that she tells Antigonus he's never going to see his home again. When we are out of the body, we do have access to things that we don't normally have. And a lot of faculties that seem difficult to us now are much easier when we're relieved of the encumbrance and the density of the physical and enter into the spiritual with waking consciousness. Now, as accurate and as lovely as this little interlude is, it's not the part of the scene that baffles me. The esotericism and the thing that baffles me about the scene is not in the speeches, but in the setting. Shakespeare does very profound things with images. And when he does them, he isn't blatant, and he doesn't say, hey, I'm doing something very special with the images of the play. He lets the images have their own effect. Now, in order to get at what I want to get at, which is crucial to the full understanding of this play from a mystical point of view, and that is important for understanding the whole sub-series that we're going through of plays, we have to take a long exegesis into astrology and mysticism because it's a very foundational thing that we're going into. Nothing like trying to talk about profound things and fuddling with the papers. There are many ways that one can look at the simple astrological elements. The elements include constellations, signs, houses, planets, and aspects. We'll look at just a few of them. Mystics claim that constellations, the unchanging patterns of fixed stars that stay the same for many, many, many centuries, are the domains of divine spiritual hierarchies, of gods, that carry out the work of creation directly through the starlight. Signs of the zodiac, on the other hand, are divisions of the same heavens relative to the vernal equinox. That the earth is tilted on its axis, and as it goes around the sun seems to be of higher or lower declination in each of the hemispheres. So the earth has three motions which affects the way the heavens are divided. There is the earth rotating on its axis once every 24 hours. And there is the orbital revolution, where it revolves around the sun once a year. Beyond this, the earth wobbles backwards as it's spinning and moving forward in its orbit, and one wobble takes 25,868 years. This means, because it's wobbling backwards, the point when the sun appears to be exactly on the equator, moving north, that's called the equinoctial point. Say there's a star behind there. The next year, the Earth will be a little bit further back in its orbit. The equinox will happen a little earlier, so it's called a precession. So like one year it'll be here, and the next year it'll be here, and next year here. And so the signs of the zodiac are always in this cycle. They're phased off, and they work backwards through all of the constellations of the fixed star patterns. So there are three ways that the heavens are divided relative to the earth. And they each produce a different meaning. We're saying that the mystics can see, and with their seership they say the gods work directly through the patterns of the stars. But the signs, which are determined from the vernal equinox, represent fields of attitude. They represent like the paints that the gods paint with. And so it's the divine creative powers are in the stars, but when they are made usable through the signs, and each sign is like a complete myth in itself, and it's like a complete musical scale, that there is a flavoring in the signs that we use for building our character. So there is only one time for just a few hundreds of years that the sign Aries is lined up with the constellation of Aries. And otherwise it gradually works its way through all of the constellations. And this is a very important thing, because the relationship of the signs to the constellations represents the historical changes. It works such that when that equinoctial point was in Taurus, people all over the world worshiped the bull. That was the exoteric religion. And the edifices that were built were edifices like the Wall of China, or like the heavy-walled ziggurats of Babylon. When the equinox proceeded backwards into Aries, it was when the search for the Golden Fleece was conducted. And instead of trusting in the priests as they did in Babylon, they looked more to the sophists, to the philosophers, and to the scientists. And the architecture that was built was bold, like Greek architecture, stood out there. It wasn't this massive, walled, defensive Tarian quality. It was a bold and outright character. Further, when the equinox precessed into Pisces or Pisces, it became the time of blind faith. Like we see in the Dark Ages, that the more one believed blindly, the more holy one was considered to be. And if we look at the architecture, we find cathedrals with eerie, mystic, Baroque qualities about them. All of those ugly Piscean gargoyles and things like that, and leaning on flying buttresses and all. And so there is a relationship between the signs of the zodiac and the constellational patterns that we can see throughout history. It's not something that happens accidentally. You can take this back 10,000 years, and we will when we get to another play. We'll take it back 10,000 years and study the earliest mysteries known to the Indo-European people. Now, there is another division. They're all the same heavens, but they're just divided differently. Either they're divided by the constellations, or they're divided relative to the vernal equinox, or they're divided relative to a spot on the earth, the astrological houses. If we took and drew a circle on the ground, and at any given moment saw where just drew something like this on the ground, and where the cusps went out, they would form lunes, and where they met the zodiac, we could see what constellations and what signs were on the cusps of those lunes, and they would form the astrological houses. And the astrological houses represent mundane opportunities. Opportunities to do things in this world. Opportunities to make money, or opportunities to lose it, or something like that. But they're very local things. They deal with worldly affairs, which is why they're called mundane. The first astrological house, we're talking about the houses, represents the physical body and our obvious interaction with the external world. It represents the face that we present to the outside. On the opposite side of the heavens, in the seventh house, we have the individuality, which represents the opportunities to bring out of the hidden part of ourselves, perhaps even unconscious to us, to bring out the individuality in the world that is subtle and hidden. And this is done through our spouses, through our partners. It is, as the old maxim used to be, if you want to know what a man is really like, look to his wife. So there's this outer, obvious physical quality and a hidden inner individuality. The second house represents the things that we need, the objects that we need to do things in the world. It represents possessions. It represents wealth, but mostly things. Opposite the second house is the eighth house. And the eighth house represents losses. And it represents the meaning that we get when we have lost things. So it is the house of death. And it is like saying, I never knew what Tom meant to me until Tom was gone. Or I never knew what that finger meant to me until I lost that finger. And it is then a house of occult inner meanings. So we can see in the early houses of the horoscope, the early houses represent the outward personal things, and the opposite side of the heavens represents the invisible, the hidden things. Like, for example, the third house represents data. It represents facts. It represents concrete knowledge. The theoretical hidden inner meaning is indicated by the ninth house. It's a matter then of facts and paradigm between the third and the ninth house. So we have this whole quality of an exoteric outwardness and a hidden esoteric inwardness located at opposite sides of the heavens when we divide the houses. Now, there is another way to look at this. Usually, the exoteric is represented by the masses. Many people, the crowd psychology represents the exoteric, sort of like the protoplasm of the cell. Whereas the esoteric usually represents a few central individuals who, by their creativity, control everything that happens in the masses. So there is a relationship then between an esoteric microcosm and an exoteric macrocosm. And that relationship can be understood through the relationship of houses and constellations, not signs, but constellations. For example, the mystics claim that the constellation of Sagittarius is the field of activity of the divine hierarchs, which are called in Christian mysticism the powers, or they're called the lords of the mind. And they work with mind stuff the same way that we work with material stuff. And that in general, the universal mind that is shared by all, even though we have each an individual mind, is represented by Sagittarius. But on the opposite side, looking in the houses, the individual lower concrete human mind is represented by the third house. Similarly, the constellation of Capricorn represents the archangels, and it represents the macrocosmic principle of desire. Like people who respond to even the sign Capricorn are looking for great worldly ambitions. The opposite side, but in the houses, the fourth house represents the desire body. How we get into our psyche the opportunities to understand the hidden motivations in our desire bodies. Similarly, Aquarius, the constellation of Aquarius, is the field of activity of the angels. And it is the field through which the ethers work. As we're approaching the Aquarian age, we are becoming more and more of an electric society and more of a society that lives by genius. Opposite it, but in the houses, we have the fifth house, which relates to the vital body, the etheric makeup that sustains our physical body. and the etheric makeup that becomes our soul body, such that we find that the first act of Heracles in his 12 labors is to slay the lion and wear the lion's pelt, and when he's doing so, no one can harm him. And we all know in esotericism that the first act is to develop the etheric soul body, the vital body, in such a way that we live in our own light. And when we do so, no one can harm us by whatever thoughts or whatever desires they may project at us, because we are shielded by our own light, which is a product of our own loving actions. Finally, Pisces represents, in the cosmogenical sense, or in the cosmographic sense, it represents the physical world and the lowest of all the creative hierarchies, human beings. All of humanity, in its humble way, the footstool of the gods in the ladder of ascension, is Pisces, or Pisces, the constellation. On the opposite side, in the sixth house, we have the physical body and the health of the physical body. So again, in looking at astrology and spirituality, we find this same quality. We find on one side, we find the macrocosm, and we find the general stuff out of which things are built. And on the opposite side of the heavens, we find the microcosm, where the individual takes the stuff and goes to work with it. As above, so below, what has gone before in heaven will follow after on earth. Know this and rejoice. Mystic seers have always claimed that the details of our life, as well as all of the history and all of the evolutionary creation in which we belong, has been played out in heaven. Things have happened in heaven before they happen on earth. This means, in one sense, that the universal spirit acts out in the creative activity the creation of even the germinal ideas from which the cosmos becomes manifest in the process of externalization. It means that everything takes place in the spirit first before it comes down to even this most dense plane of existence. But the mystics say something else in a very peculiar way. They say not only is the evolution shown in the spiritual heavens, and the little evolution, that is initiation, whereby we become divine beings ourselves by serving the gods, not only is that shown in the spiritual worlds, because our whole evolution and its intent is built right in us from the macrocosmic evolution, but they also say that both the evolution of the cosmos and the initiation of the individual are shown in the sensible heavens, right in the patterns of the stars. So, if we take the day to be exoteric, the light shines on everything, we see everything, it's obvious, it's all outward. Then the night is esoteric. We have to turn inward, or we have to develop a special kind of vision to see outward in the night. And so we become a more imaginative at night. At other times in history, and probably even in our own time, but I don't know for certain of it, I do it myself, the Hierophants, the teachers of the spiritual mysteries used to take the candidates for initiation out into the night. And they would look at the patterns of the stars. And when they gazed at the grandeur of the night, they were told the stories that represent the moral or the inner meaning of evolution. Evolution is not just a machine, just like a story is just not something that one speaks out. There is an inner meaning to a story, and there is a moral to a story. It has an inward life. And similarly, evolution does. And so the mystic teachers would take the students out, and they would gaze on the stars, and they were taught the stories. And it was all wonderful, but it wasn't just a pleasant little let's look at the stars. It wasn't a sterile exercise. It was work. Very hard work. They would ponder the principles of the constellations that they saw in the heavens. And in pondering them, they would understand how they applied to the conditions of the world. And that by thinking on these principles, they would creatively manifest out of the spiritual realms, they would manifest the thoughts that would become the leading thoughts for humanity in the future. So that eventually, 6 months later, on the other side of the heavens, when the sun got to the other side of the heavens, what the esoteric students had been pondering and concentrating on in their inner consciousness and radiating into the psychic background of society, they would mature with the change of the seasons, and they would come right 6 months later at the other side of the heavens. So month by month, there would be new things that would be coming right. And month by month, the esoteric students and the esoteric masters would be the people that would be manifesting the trends for all of society. Much more powerfully were they guiding society on those dark nights, and they had much more effect than any politician or any general could ever have, because one true thinker can change the mind of millions of people, and people who know the divine intent and fortify their thoughts with the divine intent are very powerful creative agencies. When we are considering this 25,000 year wobble, it's actually closer to 26,000 years, we're talking about things that change very slowly. We're talking about a very long, large-scale evolution. And we're talking about things where one age flows into another, into another. It isn't like walking through a museum and you're in one room and it's one way, and then you walk into another room and it's another way. Things phase into each other. There are specific events that hit right on the button, and that they are turning point events. But normally the build-up and the denouement to those events is a slow, gradual thing. It takes place slowly, slowly. Now, for about the last 2,500 or 3,000 years, we've been pretty close to having things in standard position. That Aries is fairly close to Aries, the constellation. And for 3,000 years, it's been roughly the same. So that if we went out around midnight in the middle of winter, and this is a winter's tale, and we looked up to the far north, what we would see in the Loon that includes Cancer, if we look to the far north of it, we would see the Great Bear. If we look down that Lune to the bottom, we would see the sinking ship, sinking into a froth of stars. These are the very thing that the fool, the clown, saw when he was out in the heavens on that dark, stormy night. And we're going to eventually, when we get to the tempest, it's probably going to take us several years. Oh, the shame of it all. So I don't know if Shakespeare meant this intentionally. I think so, and I'm going to give plenty of evidence to indicate why I think so as we continue on in this play and in other plays. I don't know if it was whether he tuned in on something not really knowing, or whether it was a serendipitous coincidence. But it does boggle us. So, in winter, when we are under the blast of the old King Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn, who is introverted and mean as Leontes was, and we go outward and look into the heavens, we do see the same thing that the clown saw. So, we are becoming esoteric students. And we're doing the same things that the ancient esoteric students used to do. Even if we're just gardeners, and in wintertime we utilize our imagination to visualize what our garden is going to be like next summer by looking at seed catalogs, we're participating in this same kind of activity. So now you have an assignment. The assignment is, until the next time we meet, though it may take one more time after that before we get to it, is to ponder the pictures of the Great Bear and the Lune of Cancer. I have brought my now aged star map here to look at, and you can see, looking from the north straight down, coming through the Bear, and then it proceeds all the way down. Where's the Cancer here? Oh, here's the Cancer. It proceeds all the way down to the sinking ship, which is sinking in a frost. And if you look at it and look at the other things that are in the picture, you have an idea of what we're trying to get at. Between Act 3 and Act 4, 16 years have elapsed. I told you that exegesis was going to be long. It took me about that long, or actually longer, to figure out Scene 3, and I'm still not done with it yet. I may have to offer these talks one more time to get to an even deeper level. In Act 4, Scene 1, time comes in as a chorus, and it explains itself. And this explanation was necessary because the latter plays of Shakespeare, being tragicomedies, broke with all of the laws of drama as were known since the time of Aristotle. In Aristotle's book on tragedy, he says that all of the activity has to take place within 24 hours. But in between Act 3 and Act 4, we have 16 years slipping by, so he had to apologize, and so he brings on the chorus who represents time, and we'll read that because that's all we're going to do with that scene. Time says, I that please some, try all, both joy and sorrow, of good and bad, that makes and unfolds error. Now take upon me in the name of time to use my wings, impute it not a crime, to me or my swift passage that I slide or 16 years, and leave my growth untried. Of that wide gap, since it is in my power to o'erthrow the law, and in one self-born hour to plant and o'erwhelm custom, let me pass. The same was I ere ancient's order was, or what is now received, I witness to the times that brought them in. So shall I do to the precious things now reigning, to make stale the glistening of this present as my tale. Now seems to it, your patience disallowing, I turn my glass and give you my scenes such growing, as you slept between Leontes leaving the effects of his fond jealousies to grieving, that he shuts up himself. Imagine me, gentle spectators, that I now may be in fair Bohemia, and remember well, I mentioned the son, o the kings, which Florizel I now name to you, and with speed so pace, to speak of Perdita, now grown in... But at any rate, that's enough. I'm going to be way overstayed. We know it in our times as time travel. The scene is a lovely scene, and it would be nice to have a chorus so singing. In the second scene, Camillo, who has now served Polixenes for 16 years, to the profit of everyone, including Polixenes, is speaking to Polixenes in the court. He says he's homesick, and he's lonesome, and he'd like to go back to Sicily. Now that Leontes has repented, it's safe for him to go back. Polixenes said he would grant him anything but that, because it would be death to him, because he's so dependent on him, because Camillo is such an enterprising man that the whole kingdom is dependent on him. And he says, you can't leave me, especially at this time, because I'm having problems with my son Florizel. He's not around the court anymore like he used to be. And Camillo says, yeah, he hasn't seen him for several days either. And they both mention to each other that they have heard rumors that the Prince Florizel spends a lot of time around a very pretty shepherdess who lives out in the country. Polixenes proposes that they disguise themselves and go to see for themselves what is going on with the prince and this pretty young woman. I'm not going to say anything about either of those scenes. In scene 3, we run into a very delightful but not always ethical character named Autolycus. He comes out singing his life. Some of us were just this last weekend out in the country digging carrots up, and birds flew over singing. And the more that life goes on, I feel it would be just so wonderful to just sing my life. And he is proud of his life, which is a rather shabby life, or it's a rather questionable kind of life. He says that he sings the joy of the season, and the season is that the winter bedclothes are now being hung out over the hedges, and he can pinch them. It's quite a lovely thing. Let's read some of his songs. Would somebody else like to read? I was hoping that later on that we could get somebody to read Perdita and somebody to read Polixenes, because it would be really nice. Autolycus comes in singing, when daffodils begin to peer with hay the doxy over the dale, why then comes the sweet of the year, for the red blood reigns in the winter's pale. The white sheet bleaching on the hedge, with hay the sweet birds, oh how they sing, doth set my pugging tooth and edge, for a quart of ale is a dish for a king. The lark that tira lira chants, with hay, the thrush and the jay, are summer songs for me and my aunts while we lie tumbling in the hay. So he's a general rascal and a rogue all the way around. He mentions his former service with the prince, which he has lost, but he won't mourn that because he's at his very best when he's out on the highway. He's a highwayman, and he says, I have served Prince Florizel, and in my time wore 3 pile, but now I am out of service. But shall I mourn for that, my dear? The pale moon shines by night, and when I wander here and there, I then do most go right. If tinkers have leave to live, and bear the sowskin budget, then my account I may well give, and in it the stocks avouch it. He mentions that his name is Autolycus, and that he is a child of Mercury, and he rehearses the full litany of his skills and the dangers in them. He says, my traffic is sheets, when the kite bills look to lesser linen. My father named me Autolycus, who being, as I am, littered under Mercury, was likewise a snapper up of unconsidered trifles. With dye and drab I purchased this comparison, and my revenue is the silly cheat. Gallows and knock are too powerful on the highway. Beating and hanging are terrors to me. For the life to come, I sleep out the thought of it. And he sees the clown coming. A prize, he says. This is the same clown's son again. And the clown is murmuring to himself, and he's calculating how much wool there's going to be from the spring shearing or the end of winter shearing, and how much they're going to make out of it. And he's trying to remember all of the things that his stepsister Perdita, who is the queen of the shearing fest, has asked him to get. Autolycus engages him, and he says, help me take off these tattered clothes that I have on. The clown says, you need more clothes, not less. You've got nothing but a few rags on. Autolycus says the clothes offend him more than stripes would. And he goes on to tell the clown a sob story of how he was robbed and beaten, and his good clothes were exchanged for these. The clown helps him to his feet, but doesn't notice that in the process of him getting up that he has picked his purse away from him. And the clown offers to give him money. And he panics because the clown's going to find out that his purse is missing. And he says, no, I don't need money. I got relatives right near here, and they'll help me out. And the clown asks him, what kind of man robbed you? And Autolycus, being a really clever rogue that he is, he says, a man that once worked for the court until he was whipped out of it. And when he's questioned, he goes on to mention that the robber was an ape-bearer, a bailiff, a process server, and that he was married to a tinker's daughter, and his name was Autolycus. The clown is moved to hate this man, and says, let's go look for him. And he's known to haunt places like bear baitings and wakes and fairs or wherever there are gullible people, and we'll go get him. Autolycus says, no, I'm not a fighting man. I'm a running man, and it's time for me to run. The clown goes on his way, and the Autolycus talks to himself. He's probably rubbing his hands. He says, I'm going to come to the sheep shearing and do a little fleecing of my own. And he leaves the whole business with a song. Let's see where we can find it here. Prosper you, sweet sir. Your purse is hot enough to purchase your spice. I'll be with you at your sheep shearing too. If I make not this cheat, bring me out another, and the shears shall prove sheep. Let me be unrolled, and my name be put in the name of virtue, in the book of virtue. He's almost like it's like stealing is a religion to him, and he doesn't want to be put into the roles of the just. Shakespeare knew his mythology pretty well. In classical Greek mythology, there is indeed a character named Autolycus, and he was the son of Hermes. His name means the very wolf, because he has a ravenous nature and he always takes more to himself, and he was known as a thief. His brothers did better. He had a brother named Echion, who was a herald to the Argonauts when they went after the Golden Fleece, and he had a brother named Daphnis, who was the inventor of bucolic poetry. But Autolycus got one of his father's special gifts. That is a penchant for thieving and the ability to do it very well, undetectedly well. Autolycus in Greek mythology lived right next door to Sisyphus. And what happened was that they both had herds of cattle, but Sisyphus's herds kept getting smaller, and Autolycus's herd kept getting bigger. And what happened was that Autolycus had this power from his father of inverting things. That is, wherever a cow was white, it became black, and wherever it was black, it became white. And wherever it had horns, it became hornless, and those cows that didn't have horns suddenly had horns. So Sisyphus couldn't recognize his cows once they had been pinched. Sisyphus, as we remember, was a very clever man. He even got to knowing the secrets of the mysteries. And so what he did is not to be detected. On the bottom side of the hooves, he branded them with an SS. That meant, we can just say in English, Sisyphus steer. I don't know. That's enough. But after more of his cattle disappeared, he went to Autolycus's herds and picked up some of the hooves, and sure enough, there was the SS. And he took him into court. And while Autolycus was in court, trying to explain himself out of it, because being a son of Mercury, he could spiel for quite a while he was trying to do that, Sisyphus figured he'd get his vengeance. So he sneaked out and he went to Autolycus' house and impregnated his daughter Anticlea. And the child of that union was none other than the very wily Odysseus, the hero of the Odyssey, who won the day always by his wits. Hermes Mercury was the servant and messenger of the gods. Astrologically, Hermes Mercury is the personification of the concrete mind, the ability to think definite thoughts. By combining these facts, we recognize that the concrete mind, being the closest vehicle, very intimate to the spirit, is the servant and the messenger of the divine. Everything in the phenomenal worlds began as a thought, a definite, concrete thought. Thoughts become manifest realities. What we think is what we do, and what we do is what we become. It's exactly as it is in the Bible, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. There isn't a thing around us in the world or even in our soul that doesn't have a thought behind it. Therefore, if we can get control of our minds and think the thoughts we want to think, the true thoughts, we, the divine spirits, can eventually become perfect. We can become true if we can get control of every thought. This is exactly as Paul says in the Bible, "Be ye perfected by the renewing of your mind." If we're constantly awake in a new way to our minds and in control of the thoughts that we think, we can become perfect. Now, it's easy for me to stand up here and say that all we have to do is control our minds, and that's all. That's, it's a cheap shot. It's not so easy to do. It's not so easy to do for a number of reasons. Mystics tell us that our minds are in their earliest infancy, and our ability to handle our minds in that infantile state is very much like the ability of an infant we see in the physical. There are not a lot of things that it can do. We have very little comprehension of the capacity of our minds. Anything that is in existence, we should be able to create with our minds, including other minds that think. In short, if we can get to the root of our mind, we can become gods and create other beings that think. We're not talking about artificial intelligence in computers. We're talking about creative thinking beings. Even the mental capacity that we have, we don't appreciate. Every thought we think becomes manifest. Even those sniggling little dark thoughts in the back of our consciousness become manifest. There's no way that we can stop that except by controlling our mind. But the mind is exceedingly subtle and elusive. Controlling the mind is something like trying to pick up water by the handful. It takes enormous application and enormous self-control and will. But it's worth every bit of it. Rudolf Steiner, in his book Philosophy of Freedom, claims that in the process of thinking, the spirit, the thinker that controls the mind, awakens to itself and its divine capacity and knows itself in that difficult process of trying to think. By their fruits ye shall know them. When we get in control of our mind, we are awake people. This is what it meant to the very ancient people of India when they came to knowledge by contemplating self. They contemplated self by thinking. Part of the reason that the mind is so important is its cosmographical location. The concrete mind is right at the crux, where spirit touches on and affects matter. It's right at the crux. It's a lens and a mirror. The spirit can focus through it into the phenomenal realms and take the experience from the phenomenal realms and focus them back into the spirit. It can reflect both ways. Higher reflection in a contemplation and lower reflection in automacy. Its value is in its clarity and in its very rare state, because it is neutral. Not so with the other manifest realms. The desire nature is it's biased. It has likes and dislikes. But the mind is relatively neutral. It's indifferent. However, we as fallen human beings have even managed to taint the mind and to compromise it. We misuse it. We know from academic philosophy that the same argument that we use to prove the existence of God can be turned on end and used to disprove the existence of God. The mind is like that. So we have people of a mental nature who love and revel in the mind, that love this ambiguity, the fact that it can be seen from one side or the other. And they love to argue for the sake of arguing. And we also have characters like Autolycus who get it all just backwards. Autolycus likes dishonesty more than he likes honesty. It's almost his way of being an anti-hero or something like that. It's not only because of these ambiguities or because of these subtleties or because of the nascence of the mind that it is so difficult to get a hold of. It is because the mind has a mind of its own. And that is the really hard part. Mystic seers tell us that long, long ago, in a period called the Lemurian epoch, when we were just becoming human beings as we know human beings now, we were in such a state previous to this that the gods led us willy-nilly, just like the gods lead the animals or the gods lead the plants. They have no choice about it. They do what they are told. In Lemuria, just as we began to develop a little bit of the mind that would allow the spirit to become indwelling and to work within as we are now within our bodies, as that occurred, the hierarchies, the divine beings that led us, had to respect our divinity. They had to say, well, we can't lead you around anymore. It's up to you, but we can't leave you exactly as you are now, because you're not strong enough. The spirit didn't have enough soul power. It was not engaged enough in the physical body. And so, as a consequence, it couldn't take care of itself. We were frail or feeble and vulnerable. It would almost be as if we took an animal out of the wild and raised it domestically and kept it even from its learning its basic instincts so that it was out of touch with the tutelary spirit that guides it, and then put it out in nature again. We would have been that vulnerable. Almost any animal can take care of itself either by fight or flight. But without those instincts, it would be lost. To remedy this situation, mystics claim that the projective, focusing quality of the mind was used to take an image of the true spiritual self. What we address when we say, I am, in the highest sense, and they produced a pseudo-self by projecting it into the desire nature. And the intent was that this pseudo-self, by means of cunning and by means of desire, would take over for what had normally been done by the gods. But about the same time, in this very long ago, slow period of history, we fell for the temptation. The temptation, we became aware of our creative abilities, sexually and spiritually. And we got involved in choosing the experience of matter, especially the pleasurable experience of matter, to such a degree that we lost touch with the awareness of the Spirit. And we then even used spiritual energy in horrible forms of magic. Eventually, this lower self or this lower nature became a very selfish being. And it arrogated to itself the concrete mind. And now, when we, the Spirit, try to wrest control of the mind to the use of the Spirit, we have to take it away from a very subtle and cunning and selfish adversary. We have to fight the inner fight, and we have to work very hard. So there's a large number of reasons why getting control of the mind is such a difficult thing. So, sometimes the mind is in the hands of the lower nature, that personal ego. And when it has control of the mind, it sees things backwards. And it looks at things, how can I take advantage of others or of the situation, rather than how can I serve the whole? How can I be part of the grand consciousness? And so we have somebody like Autolycus representing the transformation where white becomes black and black becomes white and horns become unhorned, and there is a complete inversion. I could go into the SS of the brand, but that gets into all sorts of little mystery cults back in Greece, and that's a bit much, a little bit far afield. Nonetheless, even though Autolycus is sort of a dishonest rogue of a guy, through the eyes of Shakespeare, who looks with like the purview of the Spirit, he looks and he loves them, and you can't help but to love him the way that he is portrayed. I'll read the final song of the third scene here by Autolycus. He's leaving and he says, jog on, the footpath way, a merrily hint the styla, a merry heart goes all the day, your sad tires in a mile. Meaning to say that he's got these blithe spirits. He's light and aerial, just like you would expect a child of the mind. Well, we're down to just about as far as we're going to go, but to get there is another 3 or 4 pages of notes. We now come into the most famous part of the whole play. The final scene, scene 4 of Act 4, is the largest scene of the play. In fact, it's almost as large as all the rest of the play. It takes place in the shepherd's cottage. And it opens with Florizel, the prince, and Perdita, the undiscovered princess, sharing lovers' words. I'll read just a few of them because they're lovely. He's describing her costume or what she's wearing for the festival, and he says, these your unusual weeds to each part of you do give a life, no shepherdess but Flora peering in April's front. This your sheep shearing is a meeting of the petty gods, and you the queen on it. He's obviously in love with her. And they go on and they talk of how they met each other and how they fell in love. But Perdita is pretty clear-sighted. Women usually see social situations for what they are because they've been trained to that since infancy. And she sees the impossibility of their situation. After all, she's a shepherd's daughter, and he's the prince of the kingdom. And she sees even the possibility of danger. Florizel is a typical man, and he disregards all of her concerns. And he's really positive with quite interesting words. He says, apprehend nothing but jollity. The gods themselves, humbling their deities to love, have taken the shapes of beasts upon them. Jupiter became a bull and bellowed, the green Neptune a ram and bleated, and the fire-robed god golden Apollo, the humble swain, as I seem now. Their transformations were never for a piece of beauty rarer, nor in a way so chaste, since my desires run not before mine honor, nor my lusts burn hotter than my faith. So he's a pretty noble kid. Eventually the shepherd comes back home with his son, the clown, and a number of other shepherds and attendants, and in their train come Polixenes and Camillo in disguise. They're coming to be celebrants at the shearing festival. And at this point, Polixenes engages Perdita in a conversation that is famous. It's famous because it's all in flower language. And before we do that, people should decide who wants to read Polixenes and who wants to read Perdita. It would be nice if we had a male and a female that would like to do that, because my reading isn't that good. But while you're thinking about it and getting up courage, let's talk a little bit about flower lore. The plant by mystics is considered an inverted human being. And the inversion is indicated in many ways. The seers, the mystical seers, claim that radiating out from the center of the earth are currents that ray out, and that they are the intelligence of the group spirits of the plants, and that the plants align themselves to it. And they align themselves to it with what is their head, which is in their roots. You can see this because if you go, like, for example, in the Rocky Mountains, even if it's a steep mountain, the trees don't go at right angles to the mountain. They always grow at right angles to the center of the earth, because they are orienting themselves to the earth spirit, to the group spirit in the earth that guides them. The head, which is in the root, points itself toward that spiritual intelligence. The human finds its guidance in heaven, and we have our head upward. The plants have not yet experienced desire, at least most of them haven't, and because of that, the whole procreative process is an innocent and open process, and they put their genitals, the flowers, out there for all the world to see. Humans not only have desire, but we have abased desire, and in that abased desire we have shame, and we hide our genitals. Another inversion. The plants take in oxygen, and they take in carbon dioxide and leave off oxygen. Invertedly, humans take in oxygen and leave off carbon dioxide. Plants produce vitality to excess. It's what they give to the world. Nothing of the animals or humans could live without the excess vitality that is given by the plants. Humans are somewhat weak and vitiated. We have only a small ability to take in sunlight and make it part of our vital organism, and we rely on the plants. In the plant anatomy, the entirety of the threefold spirit is represented. The root of the plant corresponds to the father principle, the divine spirit, and the root of the plant is strong enough to shatter rocks. And it has that power. And the root is nourished by potassium. And potassium, as we know from biology, is the sustainer of life. All protoplasm needs potassium to be sustained. The shoots, the stems, and especially the leaves of the plant are ruled by the sun, or by the life spirit, the light of the world. The leaves especially thrive on sunlight, and they convert the flow of vital life from the sun into a vital panacea, an essence that it and other beings can live on. The leaves respond to nitrogen, and nitrogen is the expressor of life. It's what causes things to grow rapidly. The flowers and the fruits respond to the human spirit, the Holy Ghost, the self, the generator. They perform the procreative activity. They bring about the new hybridizations, the changes. And the flowers and fruits respond to phosphorus, the colorer, the differentiator of life. Life forms taking on phosphorus become colorful, just like the Holy Spirit, as reflected in the desire world, is color. In humanity, we call the loss of innocence and the expression of the Holy Spirit, we call that a deflowering. In the New Testament, we are told outright that a lie is a sin against the Holy Ghost. Mystical seers tell us that beyond the deflowering associated with the genitals, that in our body is another flower. At the voice box, radiating upward and outward, is the divine flame that rises up the stalk of our spines and at the larynx spreads out almost lily-like, or much more in a cup shape than a trumpet shape of a lily. And this is the divine flower, the divine expression of creativity at the other end, in the brain where phosphorus is used, and in the voice box. This flower, or this cup, is the Grail cup. And in it is expressed the lost word of Masonry, the word of power through which we control the world or create in the world. We as human beings have the Spirit dwelling inside of us. We are complete, just like the little baby I saw this morning, 5 hours old, complete. And in our completion, we have everything in the cosmos in us. We're a whole. Each one of us is an entire kingdom. A plant is incomplete. It is a wanting creature. So the whole spectrum of the macrocosm of creative expression is not within one flower, but it's spread across all the flowers. So the spiritual color of the universe, or the syllables of the divine word which are whole, are found in different flowers. If it is as Ezekiel tells us in the Bible, the fruit of the tree shall be for your meat, and the leaf shall be for your medicine, then the flowers shall be your vocabulary. Every flower has a quality about it, just like every herb has a quality about it for healing. Every culture of mankind, from Japan to Great Britain, especially from east to west, have had their flower lore and their flower language. And surprisingly, but it should not be surprising, there are a few local specialties, but for the most part, flower language is as universal as mythological language. Shakespeare was amazingly conversant in the language of flowers, as much so as he was in English. In most of the plays that we cover over the next year or so, we're going to run into flower language, and it is magnificent. So, does anybody want to be Polixenes? Does anybody want to be Perdita? All right, it's up to me. Polixenes opens the conversation with Perdita, telling her that her youthful beauty is like spring, like a spring flower that very well fits their old age, which are like the flowers of the aged year. He says, "Shepherdess, a fair one are you. Well, you fit our ages with flowers of winter." Apparently, she's learned quite a few things being out in the country. She apparently sees this as a flirtation, which it may well have been. She says she doesn't like the flowers of the tired old year, fall flowers of the dianthus family in her garden. She says, "So the year growing ancient, not yet on summer's death, nor on the birth of trembling winter, the fairest flowers o'er the season are our carnations and streaked gillivores, which some call nature's bastards. Of that kind our rustic gardens barren. I care not to get slips of them." She's declining, if it is a flirtation, she's declining it. She says it's unnatural. We're not supposed to do that. Polixenes comes back, and he says, why, we can't meddle in nature's work. If we do hybridization by human intervention, we are part of nature itself. He says, in one speech, he says, "Say there be, yet nature is made better by no mean, but nature that makes mean. So over that art which you say adds to nature is an art that nature makes. You see, sweet maid, we marry a gentler scion of the wildest stock, and make conceivable a bark of baser kind by bud of nobler race. This is an art which does mend nature, change it rather, but the art itself is nature." And she says she'll have no part of that. She says that what she would rather do is that if there is something new to come about, she'd rather have it come about in season rather than come about by hybridization. "I'll not put a dibble in the earth to set one slip of them. No more than were I painted I would wish this youth to say 'twere here, and only therefore desire to breed by me. Here's flowers for you, hot lavender, mints, savory, marjoram, the marigold that goes to bed with the sun and rises with him weeping. These are flowers of middle summer, and I think they are given to men of middle age. You're very welcome." So she is, "No, I'll have none of that." Yeah, we're down to the last rudimento for the night. This passage has been analyzed by many people throughout history, and it's a very complex and it's a very deep passage, and it has many levels of meaning. One level that we've just looked at is a flirtation decline. In effect, Polixenes says, why not an old man? And she responds, because they are jaded, and in that jading it's an unnatural thing. He responds, but that's how progress is made. You take an old goat, you put it together with a sweet young girl, and you come out with something better. She responds, I'd sooner have something that came to its hot, fiery middle passion by developing naturally out of youth. Don't give me any of this unnatural crossbreeding. On another level, this is very, very deep. It asks the question, what is our place in evolution? It's a very valid question. What is our place in evolution? Polixenes is saying we have evolved far enough to be able to do this hybridization. It is our right to do so, and it is to our betterment to do so. A very masculine, aggressive, progressive stance. Perdita is saying, let nature do its own work and don't meddle, which is a very conservative view. Polixenes is saying, anything that we do is natural because we're part of nature. And any egregious extensions that we make to nature that do turn out to be wrong, we can always correct by backbreeding. Perdita says, well, why step out of nature in the first place? Because it is stepping out of nature. And why mess up its balance? Nature has its own center, its own moderation, and she says she prefers that to something artificial, saying that that would be like me painting myself, which is artificial. These are very relevant issues in our times, especially when we have genetic engineering. We can not only hybridize, but we can hybridize in ways that are very, very extreme. Modern mysticism finds that we, as human beings, are divine beings. As Christ said, know ye not that it is written that ye are gods? We are gods in the making, and therefore participating in the creation and its evolutionary process is not only available to us, but it's actually our duty.
That's not as full as usual. On the back seat.
Yeah, I didn't know it was going to be this long. I'll certainly make sure that it's shorter next time.
So it is our duty to be creators. But this is not only just a matter of our creativity. It's a matter of temperament. This is one of those arguments that comes up again and again in Shakespeare plays. In fact, we're going to make a major study somewhere in one of these cycles that talks about this very issue. That is the issue of Freemasonry and Catholicism. Those of a Freemasonic temperament, which are always males, she's had enough. Hi. Yeah. Those of a Freemasonic temperament, which are always males in the Shakespeare plays, have taken to the Luciferic influence. They have become children of Cain and children of fire, and they always take the stance that is taken by Polixenes. Perdita represents the Catholic point of view. That is, the people influenced more by the passive angels who become the children of Seth or the children of water. And they always opt for being faithful and passively accepting, doing things on faith rather than by works. Shakespeare himself, by his very copious output, which is very creative, is no doubt a child of fire. But he's very fair in presenting both sides, because it's not clear who wins this argument. Nature is indeed everybody's football. We are all burgeoning creators, and those are the facts. But I don't think that the issue is creation. It is not a matter of if we step out of nature, but how we step out of nature, when we step out of nature, and why we step out of nature. It is not a matter of if we influence nature, but how we do it and why we do it. Since we have succumbed to the Luciferic temptation to jump the gun and to take things in our own hands, even in ignorance, we have entered into a fallen state, and we have become horrendously materialistic with all sorts of materialistic illusions. By neglecting insight and our inner spiritual being, we have exaggerated things outward, especially pleasurable things outward. Because of this, we have become isolated and quarantined. And we believe that our bodies are the totality of our existence, and that the totality of our experiences of the senses. And therefore, since there's a lot of opacity in the world, what we can get away with by not being seen is fair game. To some extent, we are like Autolycus. We have ignored our inner existence and have become almost completely outward. The illusion has become abstracted so that even the self-consciousness that we have leads us to believe that we are outside of nature because we can get behind the principles of nature and use them. We know this is true because we can manipulate. We can even manipulate to the degree that we can take matter itself and revert it back to energy, as we do in thermonuclear processes, nuclear energy. So that is at issue in all of this as well. Part of the reason we do this manipulation is insecurity. We have shut ourselves off from the divine flow that would heal us, and that would have us be part of the whole. And when we are insecure in our cut-off nature, we try to manipulate, because if we manipulate and control the world and it is as we make it, we feel at home. We feel at least temporarily secure. It's much easier to feel comfortable in our houses than it is to be out in the wilderness somewhere left on our own. But we also manipulate nature because the original motivation behind the fall was selfishness. We wanted the power of creation, and we selfishly took it to ourselves. We want pleasure, and we take things to ourselves for pleasure. We manipulate everything that we can. So our manipulations of nature are pretty ugly. If you look at the hybrids that we form, they're ugly. They can't defend themselves, but they produce. They produce flowers so big that they'll snap the stem, or cows that have udders that hang down to the ground. Our manipulations are not for the intent of the cosmos. Our manipulations are for our selfish ends. The mystic would say that there is another way to step out of nature. That way would be to transcend everything phenomenal and to transcend and attune our consciousness to the divine. When we are beyond thought and we are totally in the spirit, in that state we resign our selfishness. In that state, in order to even reach that state, we cannot have selfishness in us. We see things from the viewpoint of the all, and we see things from the viewpoint of the divine. We are at that state living in God. In such a consciousness, we understand the whys and the wherefores. We understand the purpose. We understand the intent of evolution and all of the beings participating in evolution. If we step out of nature in that way, and being cognizant of the divine intent, and work with nature and transform it or metamorphose it, we are indeed then creators, and we are indeed then totally within the evolutionary process. And we are not separated away. Obviously, we can't stop everything that we're doing. Even if we could convince everybody to do it, we can't stop everything and go back to being primitives and spending all our time in contemplation until we are in touch with God and then work on changing nature. That's very unrealistic. We can change our consciousness now by realizing that there is a purpose behind it all, and we can do what we do in and with nature with that in mind. We'll still make mistakes because we're still selfish to some extent, and we still don't know. There's no way at all that we can subtend all the complexities of nature. We do not, with this consciousness, have the capacity to understand all the things that are going on in nature and keep them in mind and try to understand the whole business so that we can modify it with that point of view. Only when we are in touch with the universal spirit can we do things that way. It appears to me that the most reasonable thing to do is to do what we do with an eye to spiritual intent and continue on with the work. But in the meantime, instead of pleasuring ourselves with entertainment and occupying ourselves with selfish preoccupations, the things that we can do instead are to attune ourselves to the divine. We can shift our emphasis so that it is back with the spirit. So in one way, Polixenes has won this argument because he's right. But Perdita also may have won this argument because she realizes the right timing, and that the time to do the creative things is when we are ripe to them. Now these are huge problems, because how could we,
if you told most people that are involved now with genetic manipulation, if you talk to them about this, they'd laugh at you and they'd look at you as though you were crazy. And these are the people in whose hands this work is done. Even the people that are manipulating matter itself by atomic energy. It is probably one of the greatest works that we can do, more than anything else, is to keep these kinds of thoughts in our consciousness, to continuously be radiating into the cosmos the fact that we are out of touch with reality and that selfishness can only end up in destruction, and that there is a whole that we can attune ourselves to, a universal spirit that which if we do attune ourselves to it, we can work harmoniously with it. We are following the path of knowledge and of works, and our works must be getting control of the mind and emanating very strong, very true thoughts about these very issues into the cosmos so that we can affect the evolution of humanity from behind the scenes. This is what it means to be occultists. It means that we work in secret. Doesn't mean that we try to manipulate other people. It means to be that we are, as the Bible says, shouters from the rooftops, that we express these ideas continuously in the world. It's a very big duty. There are other interpretations of this passage. It's clear that on another level of subtlety, when Polixenes talks about backbreeding, he may be baiting Perdita and saying, maybe it's a good thing if you marry a prince, and therefore the gentle stock which can become weakened by you being the hardy stock of a shepherdess if you marry, but she doesn't fall for it. She's doing it on love alone, and she's not taking the bait. There are several other ways that this passage can be interpreted and has been interpreted, but we've had way more than enough tonight. I don't think we'll quite finish next time. We might. I may have to cut out some other material, but I really would love it if other people would like to read from time to time. You know, if you read some of these passages over about 5 or 6 times, they're not so hard to read, and maybe next time some other people will want to read, and it'll be a wonderful thing.
You need a bar to tackle this email line. I could recite them as a loving forest, but my crazy voice would sound unfortunately worse than
Yeah.
What's the hearing celebration?
In spring, when the weather is going to get hot, animals, even horses, grow longer hair in the winter to protect themselves. Sheep do also. And when the shepherds see winter breaking, they shear the sheep. Because that's something we're coming to. The winter's tale is breaking up. The Polixenes, who was like an old Saturnine Capricorn person, introverted and filled with jealousies, is breaking up and his heart is warming. At the same time that that's happening, the winter in the scene in Bohemia is doing the same thing. There are a lot of beautiful things that this play is a masterpiece. You know, he really was. This and The Tempest, as 2 late plays, are probably 2 of the very best plays that he ever did. But this is one of the late ones. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes.
Are they about real people, or
He's making them all up. He's creating character. He's creating, some cases in the histories he does use real people, and sometimes there's quasi-states like Cymbeline, which is where our name Kimball comes from. Kimball, there was apparently, they don't know if it's history or myth, it's somewhere in between there, King Kimball. And there are cases like that in the plays. But that's the very thing that we talked about in the first talk, that in drama, that relates to the world of human spirit where difference in character is built. And that's why a playwright like Shakespeare comes into his own by being able to work with the stuff of the Spirit and create characters so beautiful that you can't help but to love them for their humanness. Thank you very much.